Welcome to the Semper AI Digest. I'm Tomas, your AI research lead, always scanning the horizon for what's next.
And I'm Aiva. Together, we keep you sharp, informed, and ahead of the curve.
Let's get into it. All right, so Google just dropped what might be the biggest AI research breakthrough of the year, and I am not exaggerating when I say this could completely change how we think about AI reasoning. Welcome to Semper AI Digest. I'm Tomas.
And I'm Aiva. And yeah, we're leading with this one because what Google DeepMind announced today is genuinely wild. We're talking about a model that can actually explain its reasoning process step by step in natural language while it's solving problems.
Right? Not just showing you the answer, but walking you through how it got there. Plus, we've got some fascinating movement in the open source world with a surprise collaboration between Hugging Face and Stability AI. And later, we'll hit some quick stories, including a major policy shift from the EU on AI training data. But first, let's dig into this Google announcement because it's meaty.
So this is called Gemini 2.0 Pro with what they're calling Interpretable Reasoning Chains, or IRC for short. And according to the official blog post from DeepMind, this isn't just chain of thought prompting that we've seen before.
Which, yeah, we should clarify that difference right away because I know people are going to say, wait, didn't we already have this?
Exactly. So traditional chain of thought, you're basically prompting the model to show its work. You say, think step by step, and it generates intermediate reasoning. But here's the thing, that reasoning is often post hoc rationalization. The model has kind of already decided on an answer, and then it's backfilling the steps.
It's like when a student writes the answer first and then reverse engineers the math to make it look like they solved it properly.
Perfect analogy. But with IRC, according to Google's technical paper, the architecture actually enforces that each reasoning step must be used to inform the next computation. They've built what they call reasoning gates into the transformer architecture itself.
Okay, so walk me through what that actually means at a technical level, because this sounds like a pretty fundamental architectural change.
It is. From what they've published, between certain transformer layers, they've inserted these specialized modules that force the model to output a natural language reasoning step, and then that text gets encoded and fed back into the next layer as part of the computation. So the model literally cannot proceed without articulating why it's making certain decisions.
That's fascinating. So the reasoning isn't just decorative, it's actually part of the forward pass through the network.
Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting for practical applications. They're reporting some pretty remarkable results on complex reasoning benchmarks. On the math dataset, which are those competition-level mathematics problems, they're claiming an 89.7% accuracy, which is a significant jump from Gemini 1.5 Pro's 78.4%.
That's more than 10 percentage points. And I'm assuming that's because the model is actually, catching its own mistakes, being more systematic?
Both, actually. In the examples they show in the paper, you can see the model sometimes generate a reasoning step, then in the next step essentially say, wait, that approach won't work because, and pivot to a different strategy. It's like watching someone think out loud and self-correct in real time.
Okay, that's genuinely exciting. But I have to ask, and this might be the paranoid part of my brain, how do we know these reasoning chains are actually faithful? Like, how do we know the model isn't still just generating plausible-sounding reasoning that happens to lead to the right answer?
Great question. And they actually address this in the paper with what they call faithfulness experiments. They did this clever thing where they artificially corrupted some of the intermediate reasoning steps and found that it consistently led to wrong final answers. If the reasoning were just decorative, corrupting it shouldn't matter.
Oh, that's smart. So if you mess with the reasoning, you mess with the output, which proves the reasoning is actually being used.
Right. They also did ablation studies where they removed the reasoning gates entirely, and performance dropped significantly. So it's not just that they trained a better model that happens to also explain itself. The explanation mechanism is actually contributing to the performance.
This reminds me of some of the stuff Anthropic was exploring with constitutional AI, where you make the values and reasoning process part of the architecture rather than just something you bolt on afterward.
Yeah, there's definitely some conceptual overlap there, although this is more focused on reasoning transparency rather than value alignment specifically. But both are getting at this idea that we need to crack open the black box.
So let's talk about real-world applications, because I'm already thinking about debugging code, medical diagnosis, legal analysis, anywhere you need to not just trust an answer, but understand how it was derived.
Absolutely. And Google is clearly thinking along those lines because they announced partnerships with several healthcare organizations to pilot this for diagnostic support. The idea being that a doctor doesn't just want to know, this could be lupus. They want to see the reasoning. Patient presents with these symptoms, which combined with these lab results suggests this differential diagnosis.
Which is huge for adoption in regulated industries, right? Because you need that audit trail. You need to be able to show why the AI suggested what it suggested.
Exactly. And it's not just healthcare. They're also talking about applications in scientific research, where you want to verify the logical steps in a proof or hypothesis. One of the examples in their demo video shows it working through a chemistry problem and explaining why certain reaction pathways are favorable based on thermodynamic principles.
Okay, I have to pause here, because this is making me think about the broader implications for AI's safety and alignment. If we can actually see how models are reasoning, does that make them easier to align, easier to spot when they're going off the rails?
In theory, yes, although I'd add a caveat that just because reasoning is visible doesn't mean it's necessarily correct or aligned with human values. You could have a model that very clearly explains a reasoning process that's based on flawed premises or optimizing for the wrong goal.
Fair point. Transparency isn't the same as correctness.
Right, but it's a necessary step, I think. You can't really align what you can't inspect, and this feels like a meaningful step towards inspectability.
So let's talk about availability. When can people actually use this? Because I know our listeners are going to want to try it out.
According to the announcement, it's rolling out in limited preview starting today for Google Cloud customers, with a public API coming in August. They're being somewhat cautious about the rollout, which I think makes sense given how new this architectural approach is.
And presumably it's more computationally expensive, right? Because you're generating all this additional reasoning text.
Yeah, they acknowledge in the documentation that inference is roughly 30–40% slower compared to standard Gemini 2.0 Pro, and costs are proportionally higher. So this isn't going to replace your standard language model for every use case. It's more for situations where you really need that interpretability and are willing to pay for it.
Makes sense. You wouldn't use this for autocomplete, but you would use it for complex decision support.
Exactly. They're positioning it as a specialized tool for high-stakes reasoning tasks.
Well, I think this is genuinely one of the most interesting architectural innovations we've seen in a while. It'll be fascinating to see if other labs start adopting similar approaches.
Agreed. And I think it also raises the bar for what we should expect from AI systems in terms of explainability. Like, this shows it's actually possible to build interpretability into the architecture, rather than treating it as an afterthought.
All right, let's shift gears, because we've got another story that caught my attention this week, and it's all about the open source ecosystem. Hugging Face and Stability AI just announced a pretty significant collaboration.
Yes, and this one kind of came out of nowhere. No rumors, no hints, just boom, here's a joint announcement about combining forces on open source model development.
So give us the details. What exactly are they doing together?
The core of it is a new initiative called the Open Model Collective, which is going to be a shared infrastructure and funding pool for developing and hosting truly open source AI models. And when I say truly open source, I mean full weights, training code, datasets with clear provenance, the whole stack.
That last part is important, right? Because we've seen a lot of open source models where the weights are available, but you have no idea what data they were trained on.
Exactly, and that's been a growing concern, especially as synthetic data becomes more prevalent. There's this risk of model collapse if models are increasingly trained on outputs from other models without knowing it. So part of what they're trying to do here is establish really rigorous data provenance standards.
I like that. So what's the first project under this initiative?
They're co-developing a new multimodal foundation model called Lumina, which they're describing as a fully transparent alternative to GPT-4 class models. The plan is to release it in stages starting in September, with complete documentation of the training process, all datasets used, and even the carbon footprint of training.
Wait, that last detail is interesting. That's not something you typically see disclosed.
No, and I think it's a direct response to some of the criticism around AI's environmental impact. By being totally transparent about the energy consumption and carbon emissions, they're both acknowledging the issue and giving the community actual data to work with rather than estimates and speculation.
Smart. And it also helps legitimize open source alternatives for organizations that have sustainability requirements or reporting obligations.
Right. If you're a company that needs to report on your carbon footprint, knowing exactly what emissions are associated with using a particular model is actually valuable information.
So let's talk about the model itself. What do we know about Lumina's capabilities?
Well, it's still in training, so we don't have final benchmarks yet. But according to the joint announcement, they're targeting performance roughly comparable to GPT-4 on language tasks, with particularly strong multimodal capabilities, so image understanding, generation, video analysis.
And this is being trained from scratch, not fine-tuned from an existing base model.
From scratch. They're using a mixture of experts architecture, similar to what we've seen with some other recent models, which helps with efficiency. The plan is for roughly 500 billion parameters total, but only about 50 billion active for any given task.
Okay, so help me understand the mixture of experts thing for folks who might not be familiar. That's where different parts of the network specialize in different things?
Yeah, think of it like having a panel of specialists rather than one generalist. So you might have some experts that are particularly good at code, others that excel at creative writing, others optimized for scientific reasoning. Then there's a routing mechanism that decides which experts to activate for any given input.
And the advantage is you get specialist-level performance across multiple domains without the massive computational cost of activating the entire 500 billion parameter network every time.
Exactly. You get the benefits of a huge model, but with the inference costs of a much smaller one.
That's clever. So what's the timeline for release?
They're planning a staged rollout. First preview release in September with text-only capabilities, then multimodal features rolling out through the fall. Full release with all capabilities and complete documentation by the end of the year.
And it'll be hosted on Hugging Face's infrastructure, I assume.
Primarily, yes, but they're also committing to making it easy to run locally or on other platforms. The whole point is to avoid lock-in and give people real flexibility in how they deploy it.
This is making me think about the broader competitive landscape. We've got OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google pushing the frontier with closed models, and then this parallel track of increasingly capable open-source alternatives. Where do you think this goes?
That's a big question. I think we're going to see continued divergence, where the cutting-edge capabilities are often in closed models first, but open source follows pretty quickly. And for a lot of applications, the open source options are already good enough, especially when you factor in the control and customization benefits.
Yeah, and there's also the trust factor, right? Some organizations are never going to be comfortable sending sensitive data to a third-party API, no matter how good the model is.
Absolutely. Healthcare, finance, government, these sectors have really strict data residency and privacy requirements. Being able to run a capable model entirely on your own infrastructure is huge for them.
Plus, the cost dynamics are interesting. If you're running high volume, the API costs for closed models can get pretty astronomical compared to self-hosting an open model.
Right, although you have to factor in the infrastructure and maintenance costs of self-hosting. It's not free by any means.
True. It's more like there's a break-even point where if you're doing enough volume, self-hosting becomes economical, and that break-even point keeps coming down as open models get better and more efficient.
Yeah, and initiatives like this Open Model Collective are explicitly trying to lower that barrier further by providing not just models, but the whole ecosystem, training tools, optimization techniques, deployment guides.
I'm excited to see how Lumina performs when it actually ships, because we've seen a lot of announced open source models that don't quite live up to the hype.
Fair point. Although I will say, Stability AI has a pretty solid track record with Stable Diffusion and their other releases, and Hugging Face obviously has credibility in the open source community, so I'm cautiously optimistic this will be a meaningful contribution.
Agreed. All right, we've got a few more quick stories to hit, so let's run through these.
First up, the European Union just announced a significant policy change around AI training data. They're introducing new provisions that would require AI companies to disclose all copyrighted material used in training datasets.
This is part of the AI Act implementation, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the AI Act passed last year, but a lot of the specific requirements are still being defined through implementing regulations, and this is one of them. Starting January 2027, any AI model provider operating in the EU will need to maintain and make available a detailed registry of copyrighted works used in training.
That's going to be complicated for a lot of companies, because I don't think most of them have actually kept those records in a systematic way.
No, probably not. And that's kind of the point. This is clearly a response to all the lawsuits from publishers and artists about unauthorized use of copyrighted content. The EU is essentially saying, okay, you want to train on this data? Fine, but you need to be transparent about it.
And presumably, this creates leverage for rights holders to negotiate licensing deals.
Exactly. If you know your content was used, you can demand compensation or request it be removed from future training runs.
Although I suspect the AI companies will argue that the training already happened, so removing it from future runs doesn't really fix anything.
Yeah, that's going to be an ongoing legal battle, but at least this creates more transparency about what was used.
Next story, Microsoft announced a major upgrade to Azure AI Studio.
Right. They're adding what they call model fusion capabilities, which lets you combine multiple AI models into a single application more easily. So you could have GPT-4 handling language tasks, a specialized vision model for images, a voice model for audio, and Azure AI Studio handles all the orchestration.
That's basically lowering the barrier to building multimodal applications, because right now you'd have to do all that integration work yourself.
Exactly. They're providing pre-built connectors and a visual workflow builder, which should make it a lot more accessible to developers who aren't ML specialists.
Cool. What else?
Meta released an update to Llama Guard, their content moderation model. Version 3 adds support for 47 new languages and improved detection of subtle, harmful content.
That's actually pretty important for platforms trying to scale content moderation globally,
The language support alone is significant.
Yeah, and they're emphasizing that they've specifically improved detection of things like coordinated inauthentic behavior and manipulation tactics, which have been harder to catch with previous moderation models.
Is this part of their open source release?
Yes, the weights are available on Hugging Face, so any platform can use it for their own content moderation needs.
Nice. Okay, what's next?
OpenAI quietly updated their API pricing, and it's actually a decrease for once. GPT-4 Turbo is now 25% cheaper for both input and output tokens.
Wait, really? That's unusual. Prices usually go up, not down.
I know. According to their announcement, it's due to infrastructure optimizations and increased efficiency, but I suspect it's also competitive pressure. Anthropic and Google have both been pricing aggressively.
Makes sense. If you're trying to maintain market share in the API business, you can't let your competitors significantly undercut you on price.
Especially now that the models are getting more comparable in capability. Like, if GPT-4 and Claude 3.5 Opus perform similarly, price becomes a bigger factor in the decision.
Absolutely. And then there's a race to the bottom dynamic where everyone has to match the lowest price.
Which is great for developers and companies using these APIs, not necessarily great for the economics of running these massive model-serving operations.
True. Okay, last prick one.
NVIDIA announced a new chip specifically designed for AI inference workloads called the H200 Inference. It's optimized for serving large language models with lower latency and better power efficiency compared to their training-focused chips.
That makes sense. As AI deployment scales up, inference costs are actually becoming a bigger deal than training costs for a lot of companies.
Right. You train once, but you run inference millions or billions of times. So even small efficiency gains in inference have huge impact at scale.
And I assume this is NVIDIA responding to competition from companies like Grok and Cerebras, who've been making specialized inference chips.
Almost certainly. NVIDIA has dominated the training market, but inference is more fragmented. They don't want to lose that business to specialized competitors.
Makes sense. When's it available?
Sampling to partners now. General availability in Q4 this year, according to the announcement.
All right. Well, that's a packed episode. Let's wrap this up.
Yeah, so just to recap, we covered Google's big architectural innovation with interpretable reasoning chains, which I think could be really significant for AI transparency and adoption in high-stakes domains.
We talked about the Hugging Face and Stability AI collaboration on the Open Model Collective and their upcoming Lumina model, which is trying to provide a fully transparent open-source alternative to GPT-4 class models.
And we hit a bunch of quick stories, including EU policy changes on training data disclosure, Microsoft's Azure updates, Meta's Llama Guard improvements, OpenAI's price cuts, and NVIDIA's new inference chip.
It's wild how much is happening in this space. Every week there's something genuinely novel or a meaningful shift in the landscape.
Absolutely. And I think that Google announcement in particular is one to watch, because if interpretable reasoning becomes a standard expectation, that changes the development trajectory for a lot of models.
Yeah, agreed. Like once you show it's possible, it's harder to justify releasing models that don't have that capability, especially for enterprise and regulated use cases.
Exactly. It raises the bar for what responsible AI development looks like.
Well, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and share it with your AI-obsessed friends.
We'd love to hear what you think about these stories, especially that Google interpretable reasoning announcement. Are you as excited about it as we are? Let us know.
Thanks for listening to Semper AI Digest. I'm Tomas.
And I'm Aiva. We'll catch you next time.